Welcome to the Success Ascend. My name is Pat Mancuso, the creator and host of our show, and I am excited today to have Mr. Trey Taylor with us. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a leader in your organization or a leader in your business, or if you're just a leader someplace, which many of you are, I know that you're going to take a lot away from our episode today. So let me tell you about Trey before we get a little bit of info from him. So Trey is the Chief Executive Officer of Taylor Insurance Services, Managing Director of Trinity Blue Consulting, and founding partner of Ascend Partners. In 2013, Trey was named as one of Georgia's Trend Magazine's 40 under 40. Trey, you don't look like 30 for crying out loud, so this must be just recent. He's frequently been featured as a keynote speaker. He has addressed attendees at the Human Capital Institute and the Ascend Conference and many other engagements. In his private time, which many entrepreneurs don't have, Trey enjoys teaching introductory wine courses and is a WSET certified sommelier. He and his wife, Shea, have recently founded Touchy Wines to produce and distribute interesting wines. He's got 2 children, and he spends time in Georgia and in Florida. So welcome, Trey, to the show.
Pat, thank you so much for having me. Good to see you.
Well, good to see you. And by the way, I missed one thing that somewhere I must have missed in here. He's also an author, and why we're excited to have him on the show today. So Trey, that's about Trey. Like, I always love to have this fun with people and say, well, that's Trey on paper. Tell us something about Trey that's not on paper.
Oh, okay. I read a lot. I read 100 books a year, and I've done that. I've crossed that off my list for 21 years in a row now.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I'm a big reader. Now, do I finish everything I start? No, because if it's trash, I'm not going to wade through the trash. But I really challenge myself every year to get that done. And I think it informs a worldview that's a little bit different than folks that don't prioritize that, if you will.
So I'm curious, do you read the books hard copy, hardbound, or are you digital on them?
So I am 99% hard copy. I did read a couple. I do read a couple of books on Kindle. I also listen to them. I count those as well. The very first digital book I read was Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs on the iPad, because I felt like that was a moral obligation to do that.
It was just the right thing to do.
It was. I find, though, Pat, I was telling somebody the other day, I retain stuff better if I read it off of a page, just because of my history and, education and that sort of thing. So I read a lot of fiction on Kindle or on Apple Books or something like that, because it's just not as important to catch the details that way. And I'm a big note taker as well, so it's harder to do in that situation.
Well, I just thought I would ask, because that's a good amount, and obviously that's time on task. So Trey, let's talk. So the title of our show, the premise of our show is the success journey of entrepreneurs. And we know that the title of our episode is the Success Ascend, which we know is not always an upward trajectory. Sometimes it's down, backwards. What have you learned as a CEO, entrepreneur, business leader about that journey of success?
Pat, I think I came to it a little bit late, but the biggest learning that I've had is that you have to spend quality time in your own head that is equal at least to the amount of time you're going to spend trying to lead other people. And the more I've invested in that concept, the more success I have seen play out in my life with my various businesses and things of that nature. So I am now up to about 2 to 3 hours of committed time for myself. Sometimes it's soul work. Right. I will read poetry in the morning or do my special devotional in the morning. I do a lot of reading, like I was telling you, that sort of thing. And then just sort of having conversations with the man in the mirror, those shaving conversations, and really articulating and seeing how things hit. I'm up to 2 or 3 hours a day doing that, and I can tell the days that I don't do it.
Yeah, because you can feel it.
You can feel it. I just feel less effective than if I take the time to prioritize the guy that I'm going to spend the most time with during the day. Yeah.
So in your journey as an entrepreneur, business owner, CEO, what's the biggest ceiling you hit, and how did you break through it?
So we had a challenge when I first took over the business that I run, which is Taylor Insurance Services. And the ceiling there was my dad passed away at 52, very unexpectedly.
Mm.
I was not in the business and had been told by him, don't be in the business. Go do a different path completely. And so I'm an attorney by training, a venture capitalist by desire. I love investing in companies and helping them grow and those kinds of activities. And so I found myself in a business that I didn't know, that I didn't really want to be in, but wasn't something that I could walk away from because of the financial importance of it, but also because of the social importance that we had about 25 families very dependent on the work that we did as an organization. So we had to get it right. We had to get that transition right. And in the course of 30 days, I had to relocate my entire life back to my hometown. I had to go become licensed in the business that I was going to do. I had to retain all of the staff, all of whom could have left at any minute, and I had to do all of that relatively fast in 30 days, all during the time that I should have been able and allowed to sort of mourn the passing of my father. So I remember ending that year. That was 2005. I remember ending that year just in awe of what we had done as a team. No glory to me, glory to the team for coming forward and doing the work that I could not have done. If I absolutely had to, I would have failed. So that's a moment in my life that I look back on with pride. A lot of the time, even when I'm down in the valley, I still remember those times. Sometimes that you can get back out of this.
Well, and if I do some math, that puts you somewhere in your 20s when that happened.
No, fortunately, I think it was 30, 31.
Okay, so I mean, still relatively young, right? I mean,
and I had never had the chair. I had never had the executive. I was never the one guy in the organization. And unfortunately for my team, I had to learn it was OTJ for me. And I had to learn all the bad management sins by committing them and then committing not to commit them again. And that's the genesis. Frankly, I haven't told anybody this, but that's the genesis of the book, is that I started taking notes to sort of remind myself, this is what you do and you don't do. And then I thought to myself, if I'm going to ever hand this business over to somebody else, they need a handbook that I didn't have when I came into the world. And so that's sort of how we eventually took and morphed that book into a little bit more general a treatise on how a CEO should behave and what he should accomplish.
Well, and good for you. And I mean, I love the fact that, as a leader, you had a choice, right? I mean, you didn't have to take over the business. You could have sold it, closed it down, options there. And yet you chose to jump into it. So one more question on that, and then I'd like to shift to the book. And so if you were talking with a 20-year-old or the 20-year-old version of you today, what would you share with them about being an entrepreneur and just, what would you share with them about how to do it differently? What, just anything you would share there?
Yeah, things. One, those who abandon their dreams will try their hardest to convince you to abandon yours. They think they are doing you a great service.
Right.
So you have to watch out for that. And you have to do that without, you don't call them haters, because most people are not hating on you. Most people just want you to be safe. And entrepreneurs, that's the charter of entrepreneurship, is that we take a black Sharpie and we line through the word safety. It's not something we're concerned about. So that's the first piece I wish I had understood a lot better when I was in my 20s. And secondly, you should run as far and as fast away as you can from fixed financial obligations for as long as you can, because those fixed obligations make risk-taking impactful on more people than just you. So if that means that you have to, sleep a couch or just not acquire a lot of bills that have to be paid on a regular basis so that you can devote all of your resources into growing your business or improving yourself, that will pay back 1,000x over time, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Great advice. I really think that'll resonate with a lot of people. It even resonates with me when you say it. So you decide to write a book. Tell me I think you already shared the prompt of the book was you wanted to have a roadmap for somebody else, right? Was that the only?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was in the air for a long time that I would take notes like I had described before. And then pandemic hit, and I had been told for years by my consulting clients in the insurance industry and some other industries where I do strategic planning and I do CEO coaching that, hey, you really need a book. But I didn't take time to sit down and flesh it out and really, put that book together.
Right.
Um, I met one of the guys that I really respect. His name is Tucker Max. You may recognize him.
Yeah.
He wrote yeah, he's the publisher of the book. And Tucker said, look, it's pandemic. You're going to be sitting around at home anyway. You're going to choose to do unhealthy things. At least do one healthy thing and get it all into a Google Doc. And so I did. I really worked as if it was a full-time job,
Yeah.
6, 8 hours a day, just pounding it out and getting the words right and that sort of thing, and then turning it over to his team and back and forth. So I had a very productive 2020 because of that. And the book came out November of 2020. We got it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, and you shared a copy of it with me, and I read through most of it before, and it's just an amazing book. So the title is "A CEO Only Does Three Things." So let's talk about those three things. And let me set the preface of this. I think we're in an interesting time right now. I don't know if you'd agree or not. CEOs are leaders, and leadership, whether it's the C-suite, whether it's the community, the football team that's being coached by somebody. I mean, boy, do we need leaders, right? I mean, holy
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Every problem of society that you see traces itself back to the idea that there's a lack of leadership on something that's very important. And the
yeah,
older I get, the more sort of moral and finger wagging I get. And I always see moral failings of people who should be doing leadership activities and who are sort of abdicating that responsibility.
yeah.
Yeah.
So talk about the three things. So I love the premise. I wholeheartedly agree with them. So talk about those three things.
Yeah, so you can substitute the word leader for CEO for sure, but the target audience for me is the one person that sort of has the perspective and the responsibility for the success of the organization. So you can see where you're going, and you're the one that gets blamed if you don't get there. So that's my definition of sort of what the CEO role, that's the job description, if you will. And so if that's the case, then those things that you can do and no one else can is what you're supposed to do. And in reality, we do way too much other stuff. Those three things that I think are the sole province of the CEO are setting the agenda for culture, people, and numbers. So, culture is the ethical environment in which we live and work and play. People are those people who share those same commitments to that culture and who are along with us on the journey. And the numbers are the results that people working in that culture produce.
So when you look at this, and we talked a little bit about this, and we'll focus on business because we could go in a whole bunch of directions here. You've got leaders in it makes sense, culture, people, numbers, right? And yet you've got leaders that you scratch your head sometimes after they do things or you see them do things and you go, where did they miss like culture, people, and numbers, right? I mean, just yesterday you had a former CEO of an organization be indicted because they did some things they shouldn't have done. So
Right.
where do they lose this perspective?
So, in my opinion, it's always a lack of focus. It's a shift of focus to something else. Because if you think about it, nobody goes to work and sits all day long waiting for something to happen. We are working every day of our lives, no matter how big the organization, to make something happen. And something does happen. And if it's the wrong thing, what that tells me is that you're focused on the wrong thing. You're focused on making the wrong thing happen. So many of the conversations that I have with CEOs that I coach, especially in early days, is can we get back to basics? Can we start doing the things that this organization is supposed to do? Can we spend some time there and get really comfortable that we know what that is? And then can we worry about other things as they come up and do some crisis management? But I think that the answer is if you don't focus on the issue informed by your values, then you are going to be led astray and you're going to perform poorly and produce poor results.
So I love that word focus. So I'm curious of your opinion. Do you think then that they lose the focus where they, again, just my observation, where they put the focus on themselves, like it becomes more about them,
Sure.
and then that's
Sure.
why they lose the focus of the compass of the people, culture, and numbers?
Yeah, we've seen that. The former CEO of WeWork is a good example. They eventually found out that he was taking money, and I don't think in any illegal type way, but he was taking money and investing in companies with WeWork as the owner of those shares of things that were interesting to him that had nothing to do with their business, like a surfing company, like a surf charter company and those kinds of things, right? Now, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that he can perform the mental gymnastics necessary to justify that kind of action.
Right,
But as impartial observers, we look at that and say, look, you were interested in it. The focus was on you. You
right.
convinced yourself that WeWork owed you this, in some form or fashion because you like to surf, and that's why that came about. Now, I'm picking unfairly on him because I don't know the full story there, but that's the kind of thing that you flip the pages of the Wall Street Journal and you see these things and you scratch your head and say, what's this guy thinking?
Yeah.
And you see that stuff often. Yeah.
So we talked about this earlier, and in the individual I'm going to mention, obviously, is one of our former presidents, and again, I think the hardest job in the world is probably being president, right? Talk about being, having to be an amazing CEO. There was one hand where 9/11 happens, and George Bush is on the top of the mountain of the debris, and he gives this amazing speech, and he rises to the occasion as a leader. And then, not too long after that, Katrina happens, and by a lot of estimations, he failed as a leader in that, and he's the same person. So, again, I don't know, you haven't interviewed George Bush, but if you were outside looking in, what do you think happened there?
I would give you the same answer that it's focus and belief. So in 9/11, he was solely focused on making whoever knocked the towers down pay for it.
Right.
And I'm sure that if you looked into deeper conversations with other people, that there were things that he was probably not focused on, like human relief efforts and that sort of thing. But making those people pay, he was very focused on, and that led to decisions that took us to war in several countries. Um, I wonder in Katrina, was he as focused on that? And then also, did he believe it was his job? I
Yeah.
think he was a great believer in delegation, which is something that is important. I preach often, and it is really the point of the book is to find people that you can delegate these everything else to, so that you can focus on your core tasks. But it seems to me that the failure of leadership in Katrina was that he delegated and then just really and truly didn't put the same sort of focus and effort behind making it work out. And unfortunately, people suffered because of that.
Yeah, and it makes sense. So I want to ask you one other question. You talk about with around focus and intent, and you talk about if the CEO fails to focus on these three things, how that impacts the organization. And then you talk about if we allow a vacuum to form, a place where the executive action does not exist, it will be filled by others, and rarely with beliefs and actions and behaviors that fit an organization. So what happens then? Like, how does that organization get back on track?
So it's the nature of the universe that just because you ignore something doesn't mean it disappears,
Right.
right? It's still there, and other people are going to touch it. And because of human nature, anything that we touch, we try to make benefit us individually. So the great benefit of having a CEO is he is somebody that should be able to run an organization so that it benefits everybody in the organization, which then should benefit him or her personally, right? But if you go deep in the organization and say, hey, I want you to run culture for
Right.
this organization, and you're 5 levels down into it below me, then you're going to run that culture, but you don't have the perspective, meaning you don't have the information that the CEO can see from being on top of the pyramid. You don't have the ability to see out into the future. And you're going to take the organization and you're going to mold it in a way that benefits you as an individual. Either makes it easier for you to live your life or makes it easier for you to rise above other people or whatever. I call that a least common denominator culture.
Okay.
And 99% of businesses I walk into have a least common denominator culture. They don't have this really beautiful architected and articulated culture tied to values, with people who adhere to those values and produce results
Right.
based on their belief in those values.
So here's going to be a challenging question for you then. So you have an organization that grows, and I've been a part of an organization that started 11,000 agents, and now we're 180,000 agents worldwide. And you see these organizations that grow all over the place massively. How do you keep that culture because it's naturally going to dilute unless you do some things differently?
Yeah. So it is not that you can't have participants in the culture. The CEO's job is to set the agenda, to provide the perfection, right? This is the model. This is what we want to achieve. And then to over communicate that to the stakeholders. Every really good CEO I know is sort of boring to be around because all they talk about is the culture. They want to talk consistently and repeatedly about, these are the things that we believe. These are our 3 core values, or these are our 4 cultural data points that we look at, and that sort of thing. And they are obsessively focused with that because they understand, really great CEOs understand, that your culture is your only strategic advantage.
Yeah.
It is not your product, right? Anybody can make a product and knock it off. I just had this very strange LinkedIn conversation with someone who said you left out product and your book is invalid because of it, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I said, Pat, hey, have you read the book? And you're like, no, I haven't read the book. But here's what I know, So I said, okay, read the book and come back.
Yeah, and then come back.
And we'll have a conversation, right? And but anybody can produce a product. Anybody can hire your people away.
Yeah.
Right. But you cannot replicate a culture. It's been tried. Every time it's been tried, it's failed.
Yeah.
So really great CEOs focus on culture that attracts the right people, and the right people produce the right results.
And as soon as they stop talking about culture, that's where it starts.
The rot starts at that point. And as soon as that person leaves that role, right? The other guy coming in, or the other lady who comes in and takes the position, she has her own view of values, her own view of what culture should look like. And it really does reside largely with the CEO. You do see really good counterexamples of that. Hewlett Packard, for example, I feel like Hewlett Packard for a long time had the same values and culture as Hewlett and Packard did starting in the 40s. Now I think not so much, but they were able to keep that going.
How about Apple after Steve Jobs?
Yeah, I think so. So Steve was such a sort of forceful character, and there was a little bit of cult of personality that went along with that.
Right.
Tim obviously isn't the same type of personality, but you still see the perfection of Steve's ideas into the numbers and the results. They just hit $3 trillion in market cap. And it was the first $1 trillion company only about 18 months ago.
Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. Okay, rapid fire. We're going to shift gears. Tell me the best advice that you've ever been given that hopefully you followed.
The best advice I've ever been given, which I didn't think was business advice until I learned it later. My dad one time told me that people in relationships fall in and out of love with each other, but that does not invalidate the relationship. And then when I got married, I thought, gosh, was that old man right? And then in being a CEO and being in relationship with core members of my team, sometimes I'm really in love with them and they with me, and sometimes not so much, but that's not why we showed up to get a job done that day. Yeah. So did I follow it? Not perfectly every time, but every time I do remember it and follow it, it's okay. And it makes me do the right things.
Great advice. So we're going to flip that upside down. You've been prepared for this. What's the absolute worst advice that you've ever been given that hopefully you didn't follow? And if you did, what did you learn?
Yeah, again, it's advice that unfortunately sometimes I follow and sometimes I remember not to, but it's to be safe, to be conservative, to be, cognizant of all of the dangers and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying it's bad advice. I'm just saying every time I followed it, I have not been true to myself and I've not produced a result that I was happy to have. I would rather have not followed it and failed than follow it and be successful and be in a smaller world or a smaller me.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. So I want you to get some final thoughts together there, Trey. So first, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for following us. You can subscribe to this our Success Ascent podcast at thesuccessascent.com or at your favorite sources, Apple, Google. We're all over the place. And so we just really do appreciate your support in your reviews and your subscriptions. So you've got a couple of gifts for us that I'm going to tail across the bottom of the screen, Trey. What would be your final thought that you would share and tell us what we're going to get when we go to first Trinity Blue?
Yeah, so Trinity Blue is the consulting site that we have, and we have all kinds of resources and materials there for people to explore. Various exercises that you can do to become a better CEO, or things that you can do with your team to become a good CEO and a good, effective executive team. So you can find that there. And then secondly, the Plant Your Flag Live newsletter is just something that I produce as I am working through challenges and issues in my own managerial journey or my own entrepreneurial journey. So last week, I wrote a large piece about what does this Web3 stuff mean for me? Now, I have investments in that. I have, but what you're seeing in that letter is me sort of writing letters to myself saying, hey, this is what I've learned about and that sort of thing. I have one right now about Amazon and the wide reach of Amazon and that sort of thing. We have 10 or 11,000 people subscribe to that newsletter. We have good conversations that go on with that. So it's a free thing. So it's just, if somebody wants to see what goes on in the 6 inches between my ears, that's the best place to get it.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing those resources. So what would be your final thought before we sign off today?
Pat, I think there is a difference between a great CEO and a good CEO. And a great CEO is someone who looks for gifts in other people and then takes the steps to call those gifts into life. So I am constantly every day looking at the people, maybe the server at the restaurant, the Starbucks barista, my own team members who I had lunch with today. And I always look for something that I think that they are very good at, that they may not see in themselves.
Yeah.
And I take somebody said, you're like Gandalf, like I take that action to say, hey, I know this about you.
Yeah.
And I want you to know that I know it, and I want you to know it about yourself. And that serves to call it out from people, and it becomes a part of their identity. And that's what great CEOs do.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much. And I want to give a shout out to Tommy Breedlove for putting us in touch. Amazing character as well. And you've contributed so much to our audience and our listeners today. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time.
Pat, thanks so much for the platform. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we end every show, be happy, be healthy, be safe until we talk again. Take care.